Okay, so tearing the rear end out of my Pioneer 500, primarily to reseal it, but we may change some bearings too because this thing has had water in it for a while. When I bought it, it was already a little milky, so it's been through some abuse. So first thing you gotta do to pull the diff is obviously jack it up. It makes sense to put the jack there and not right here where it's in your way, right? So the jack sitting on the cross member very sturdily. You should always use jack stands. I don't. You should. Pull the tires and then pull the knuckles. Now I didn't say pull the axle nut because there's no reason to, right? This is a great slide hammer. So this nice big cast knuckle with these big rubber bushings, very high quality Honda stuff. Use it as a slide hammer, pop the axle out of the diff. Clean your axle, inspect the sealing surface. That one's a little grooved, I'll polish it up some. This other axle's pretty stuck. So I'm gonna use this big Polaris clutch puller to knock it out, because once you have one axle out, you can go through the diff and knock the other axle out on most Hondas. You can even do that on the front differential of some Hondas, like both of these Hondas, actually. There's no cross pin through the differential, so you can pop the axle out that way. Yeah, so once you get one axle out, don't fight with the other one yanking on or slide hammering it, just put a punch through. Once you get the axles out, we're gonna unbolt the differential. 1, 2, 3, bolts and nuts. We'll remove our brake caliper with those two 12s right there. 1, 2 12s, and we'll pull it out. Now, while you're doing all this, it definitely makes sense to change your rear output shaft seal. Mine's not really leaking, but it's old, and I'm 90% of the way there to change the seal by moving the diff, so we're gonna do that too. But yeah, stand by for tips and tricks on how to rebuild and reseal this guy coming soon. All right, there it is. Gonna be one of the easiest rear diffs to pull of all times. Since I last left you, it took about maybe 5 minutes to get it on the bench. Just pull the brakes off and snatch her out of there. Very straightforward. Go ahead and draining it now. Probably would have made sense to drain it in there, but you know, just drain it into your socket drawer. Works nicely. You can see the oil's a little milky, but it's really not that bad. That's because I change it all the time because I do maintenance like a motherfucker. But yeah, left the shocks in place, didn't mess with the control arms or anything like that, and it came right out. This needs to be greased up. These splines are a little nasty looking. We'll check out the U-joint while we're in here, inspect all that, and then we'll remove that and change the seal. But yeah, let's see how toasted these bearings are. Very excited to see how bad it is. Pretty beefy diff, a lot of reinforcements, but the pinion gears are really tiny. So after you get it drained, the next thing you want to do is put the rotor in a vise. Yes, that's kind of taboo, but this one's so scratched up I'm not even going to bother putting a piece of wood. And then zip off the nut that's in here. There's a 22mm nut. That is your coupler retainer nut. And now we can go back over the bench and we should be able to remove the coupler, which will get us to the pinion seal. Pay attention to how those seals go in. People put them in backwards all the time. That's how they're supposed to look. I don't know why people don't pay attention, but I know most seals go in the opposite way, but Honda axle seals always look like that, guys. Stop putting seals in backwards. Jeez. So fun fact, these are wet splines, where most Honda IRS rear ends, like a Rubicon, the splines are dry. These splines run in gear oil, which makes it easier to get the axles out. Very nice, self-lubricating splines. That means that the seal seals onto the axle shaft, which means the seal has to deal with some rocking, and maybe it makes the seal a little bit less effective. I don't know, but I like that the axles are never welded into the back of a Pioneer 500 unless you run water in them exclusively. Got the first seal out. Look how nasty it is in there. The pinion gear has a slight amount of play in it, so this diff is probably, its days are limited. I probably won't mess with changing the pinion bearings on it. It's not a very successful thing usually. The diffs aren't that expensive. But Honda does use two of these big goofy seals stacked on top of each other. So there's number one. There's number two. The way I get them out is I hammer a punch into the seal surface right there, because there's this big ring. You can see where I did it right there. And then I just twist the punch out to get them out. You can use a seal puller or whatever, but that's how I do it. But yeah, pretty nasty. This thing, this seal went out a long time ago and it's had no attention. So definitely needs some attention. Look how grooved this is. That is really bad. So I'm gonna polish that up, but we'll put new seals in it, but next time it has an issue, it's going to get a brand new diff because the seal surfaces are screwed up, so it needs new axles. I won't upgrade them anyway. It needs a new coupler, and the bearings and the pinion are a little dorked up. And I don't like messing with changing those. I'll change the side gear or the ring gear bearings, that's easier, but these things are kind of a lost cause. Look how small the splines are on that thing, by the way. This coupler looks big and beefy, but it's actually pretty small internals. All right, so we got our 2 new seals pressed in there. There's actually 2 seals stacked on top of each other, kind of wild. One thing to point out is that on this differential, there's actually a little hole down here. And that hole is to allow you to push the 2 seals together if you were to have some kind of pressure between them and you had this in place. It's like a pressure relief thing. So what I do is I get the 2 seals in and I plug that hole. So that hole is supposed to get plugged by the seal, but I've actually seen water and mud get in there up between the 2 seals and cause issues. Not sure why Honda did that. It's like a pressure relief thing. I've never had a problem plugging it, and to me it makes more sense to plug it for deep water riding. So pro tip to try to improve the waterproofness of your diff, just take some ultra gray and just clean that hole real good with carburetor cleaner, and then wipe some ultra gray in it, and it'll help keep the mud out of those seals, and they'll last longer. Alright, so this thing had some pretty big grooves on it, like I showed earlier. I just polished it up with some 800 grit sandpaper, and I knocked the edges off the grooves so they're not as sharp, so they won't cut the seals. And the seals will be in slightly different places now, so hopefully it'll be okay for a while. Like I said, this pinion has some play in it, so this diff probably won't last forever, but give it the best chance we can without dumping any more money into it. Alright guys, the differential is back in place. And there's a couple tricks to it I'm going to try to tell you. So number 1, your brake caliper, you have to tuck it way up out of here, get it out of your way while you're trying to stab it. Then with one hand, you reach underneath here to support the diff, and with the other hand, you line up your shaft. It's kind of hard to get the brake rotor past this bracket with the shaft lined up. So it may have been easier to take off the U-joint and everything like that, put that on the diff, and then try to stab it onto the motor. But I could not find an output shaft seal, so I'm gonna have to change that later. So I didn't mess with the U-joint, so I was kind of lining up the coupler on the front of the diff. It's not even a diff, excuse me. The coupler on the front of the rear end and the shaft at the same time. So you got to kind of jiggle it, you know, like get the rotor past the bracket, turn it, get it sitting in the bracket with the shaft lined up all at the same time. Once you get that in there, you can go ahead and bolt the chunk in. Come from the top, you can get the brake caliper on there and get your 2 12s in pretty easy. But it is a little bit of a faff, so kind of take your time, don't get pissed off. But yeah, we got new seals in it, and we get some fresh gear oil, and hopefully it'll last a little while. Once I got everything in there and got the coupler tightened back down, it feels okay. There is a slight amount of play in the pinion gear. So its days are numbered, but this thing only has 30 horsepower, so maybe it'll last longer than I think. Who knows? But yeah, so time to stab the axles in, put the knuckles on, and then this job will be done.